It's Monday here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and we've got to talk about who is rising the fastest on the Steelers roster after that second preseason game where the offense and defense looked pretty good. I'm Chris Carter, your host of the show. We've got Ray Fittipaldo talking with us about who he sees rising and falling on the Steelers depth chart and roster, all here on an exciting Monday episode brought to you by Mike's Beer Bar. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Ray Fittipaldo. We're both of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Go to post-gazette.com for all of our content. Find this show every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube by searching Post-Gazette Sports or the North Shore Drive podcast. We also have daily content that comes out video and audio-wise from all of our staff covering Pittsburgh sports here. Check it out on our YouTube page and our podcasting apps. And we want to remind you that this show is sponsored by Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in Pittsburgh. I go there all the time myself from the North Shore, in the North Shore. Go check out there for their over 500 different available beers, 300 of being on local beers, and 80 of those being local beers on tap. More on Mike's in a bit here. But Ray, we got to talk a little. We're not going to talk specifically about the preseason game itself because that's over and done with. The Steelers looked really dominant. They finished the first half up 21-0. It was a confident showing, but I think the biggest thing that everyone's looking at, and we're even starting to see on national media as far as Monday morning ESPN shows, people are starting to recognize that Kenny Pickett is not the same Kenny Pickett he was last year. Do you believe in what you're seeing as far as 3 drives, 3 touchdowns, this offense is going to score more this year?
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. After watching the Tampa Bay and the Buffalo game, I don't know how you can't feel positive about where this offense is. You could sort of say to yourself, okay, the Buccaneers didn't play a lot of their starters, so take that with a grain of salt. But Buffalo played their starters, and they played their starters longer than the Steelers did on Saturday night. So, the only thing that I wish happened was, and I don't blame Mike Tomlin for pulling the starters after scoring 2 touchdowns, but it was only 7 plays. And maybe – I just feel like maybe there was one more series in there to see, okay, can they do it again? Or, what would have happened if they went out there for a third series? But, Kenny Pickett, 3 for 4, 43 yards, beautiful back shoulder throw to Pat Freiermuth. You could tell they've been working on that stuff in practice, and boom, it shows up in a game.
When we talked to Pat Freiermuth about it after the game, he was talking about it like it being routine. Like, it was just something we worked on. And again, if you look at all 3 of the touchdowns the Steelers' first team offense has scored in preseason, again, they've had 3 drives, 1 drive against the Buccaneers, 2 against the Bills. All 3 of them have been touchdowns from 25 yards or further out. That was something that didn't happen for the Steelers at all last season. Big plays were just an anomaly to them. And I look at how each of the passing ones are constructed. The run play we'll get to in a bit when we talk some Jaylen Warren, Najee Harris, and that situation with the offensive line too. But both the passes that Kenny Pickett has thrown for touchdowns in these preseason drives, the first one being to George Pickens, he looked off the safety to create space, went back, attacked the zone in the right way for George Pickens to catch the ball, get yards after the catch, and get into the end zone. Pat Freiermuth, a similar situation. Cover 2, looks off the safety, puts the ball in a perfect position so that the linebacker, who had decent position, couldn't get to the ball, and also so that Pat Freiermuth could catch it and continue his momentum into the end zone. These were things you didn't see routinely from Kenny Pickett last year. There were moments where you could see it, but now we're seeing it not just on the touchdown passes, but the passes that move them down the field. A third down conversion they had to Allen Robinson, similar thing. I think it's a good sign. It doesn't mean that he's going to do it every play all the time and he's about to become an elite quarterback, but it does mean that he has taken significant steps in the progress of his processing and how he approaches each play.
Yeah, to get to that 25-yard to get to the Jaylen Warren touchdown run, they had to convert a third down. And then to get to the Tampa Bay touchdown, I think they had to convert 2 third downs. So you're right, that 3rd and 7 before the Jaylen Warren run was big, and there's no 2 ways about it. And I think they had to convert I want to say they were like 2 third downs, and they were both 5 yards or longer against the Buccaneers, Chris. I'd have to go back and look at that more closely. But the point is, third and intermediate, third and long, much lower percentage than third and short. And so far in the first 2 preseason games, Pickett's been money on those throws as well. It's just not, the pass to Freiermuth or the pass to Pickens. It's getting in position to score touchdowns after you move the chains in your own territory, right? Earlier in drives. I think that's, just as encouraging, as the big touchdowns to Pickens and to Freiermuth.
Absolutely. There's a lot to be encouraged about there. And this may sound crazy to some people, but I think you should also be encouraged by what you're seeing at left tackle. And not because Broderick Jones has lit it up. I mean, he's done fine. He did give up a sack in the game, but he's been fine, especially really good for a rookie. But Dan Moore Jr. is a lot better than he was his rookie year. I think he's taken a step up from where he was last year. And he's looking like he's ready to hold on to the starting left tackle position, and not because of any lack of progress from Broderick Jones.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Broderick Jones, people are freaking out about him giving up 2 sacks in 2 games. But listen, he's a young player. It's going to take time for him to get used to the NFL. Believe it or not, even though Georgia is this phenomenal program, there is a step from college football to the NFL. So
yeah, you don't say.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy that people are saying, "Oh, he's a bust already." Please, I mean, let's just have some patience and let's look at this with a little bit of perspective. But more to your point, Dan Moore's been really good, and I've said this in practice, Chris. If you'd look at Dan Moore and Broderick Jones, have them practice in blank practice jerseys, not knowing who was picked where, it would be pretty clear that Dan Moore is the better player at this point.
Right.
And in a lot of ways, it makes a ton of sense. The guy's got like 34 games of starting experience in the NFL under his belt. He's done it with, the guys around him. He's learning how to play with Sam Mallow. He's playing next to the tight ends, the communication with Mason Cole. So it makes sense that he's further ahead. But I still think, Chris, at some point during his rookie season, we'll see Broderick Jones out there. I just don't think it's going to be for the opener against the 49ers.
And we talked about this when they drafted him, right? Like the Steelers, not when they drafted him, when the schedule was released, the Steelers are going to open up the year with Nick Bosa, Myles Garrett, Max Crosby. There's going to be a slew of edge rushers that if Broderick Jones was to start, he's going to be facing some of the best in the NFL week after week after week. And, the Steelers last year, they drafted Kenny Pickett and they were very confident in him. And you see the progress that Kenny Pickett's made now, but they rested him for the first 3 games because they wanted him to ease into the process, and eventually they introduced him by week 4. Now, when does that happen for Broderick Jones? I don't know, because you know what? Dan Moore Jr., I think, might be better at left tackle than Mitch Trubisky was at quarterback for the Steelers, and maybe it becomes a situation that they have to make some tough decisions about how they want to use him on the offensive line. But either way, I do agree, Broderick Jones's day will come, but Dan Moore Jr. has made it so it doesn't have to come before he's actually ready for it. And I think that, again, that's just a very good situation for the Steelers to be in. Sorry, you were going to say something, Ray.
No, I was just going to say, listen, and it's not just the idea of, just throw Broderick Jones in there, let him learn trial by fire. What you do at left tackle directly affects how you approach your offense. I mean, I don't want to make too big of a deal out of this, but sending Pat Freiermuth out for a touchdown pass, Connor Hayward out for a touchdown pass, Darnell Washington drawing 2 pass interference penalties. In a lot of situations, when you have a tackle who isn't capable of protecting one-on-one, who gets sacrificed? It's usually the tight end who has to stay in and block. So it's not just the idea of, let him learn by trial and error. No, who you put out there has a direct influence on your personnel packages and, of course, your play calling as well.
Absolutely. I want to talk to you about the Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren situation, as well as other players who might be catching your eye, Joey Porter Jr., other guys that are working well. We'll talk about all of that here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Ray Fittipaldo. But first, I want to remind you guys that this show is sponsored by Mike's Beer Bar. We say this is the North Shore Drive podcast. Well, guess what? On the North Shore, you need to make sure you go to Mike's. Mike's is the best beer bar in town. And when you go there, if you're in for a Steelers game, a Pirates game, a Pitt game, Mike's Beer Bar is right across the street from PNC Park. It's a must-go-to destination, whether you're visiting town or you're here and you live in Pittsburgh and you just want a great place to go. They also have the best selection of beer in town, as well as amazing food options with over 20 televisions that you can catch all your NFL, college football, Pirates, Penguins, Riverhounds, Premier League, whatever sport you're into, you can watch at Mike's Beer Bar. Come on and you can try one of their 500 different available beers, 300 of them being local beers, as well as 80 of those local beers being craft beers on tapped. You can get a flight to try out every option that you can dream of as far as those beers. And trust me, you won't run out of favorites, because I never do, and I'm always there. So don't go to Mike's Beer Bar, check out their drinks. I want to talk about their food in a little bit here, because it's also one of my favorite places to go to for that. Again, go check out Mike's Beer Bar on the North Shore. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, I'm your host, Chris Carter, with Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk about the running back situation, because that's what a lot of people want to focus on right now, and it seems to be the buzz of social media and everything. And Jaylen Warren, once again, an explosive play. He did it a few times last season. This time it comes off of on the Steelers' first drive of the game. The Steelers ran the ball twice with Najee Harris, got 3 yards each time, and I thought were good runs. Like, the Bills' defense was just kind of located in the right spots. They were ready to defend those plays. But then Jaylen Warren on a run play where they faked the jet sweep run direction, caught the Bills in a soft spot of their defense, had the offensive line blocked it perfectly, as well as Deontay Johnson, who threw a great block, and Warren takes it 62 yards for a touchdown. And so people look at that and they say, well, why isn't he starting? Why are the Steelers being so stubborn by putting Najee Harris in there? And it just makes a lot of us who cover the team just go like, oh, okay, guys, why are we doing this still? Because this is such an old argument that is outdated here. But Ray, if you were to address someone who says that Jaylen Warren should be the number 1 running back and Najee Harris should be on the bench, what would you say to that?
Small sample size. And that goes for Jaylen Warren, and that goes for Najee Harris. That goes for the entire Steelers running game through 2 preseason games. I actually thought we were going to get a bigger dose of the running game with the starters in there. But, Chris, what can you do? Jaylen Warren rips off a 62-yard run. You only play for 2 series. I mean, I get it. Maybe, if they didn't score on that run, maybe we would have seen more ground and pound from Matt Canada and Mike Tomlin. We'll never really know that. So, I think if you want to look at this, Chris, from, a big picture perspective, what Jaylen Warren is doing, it's not just a 162-yard run in a preseason game. Mm-hmm. Guy's been really, really good in training camp. Yes, the guy had a really, really good rookie season. So I think if you want to look at this from the big picture, let's do it this way. Najee Harris struggled in the first half of last season. They weren't really quick to pull the trigger on a, running back 50-50 rotation. They kind of still kept Najee in there. And I understand he was dealing with an injury, but he was deemed healthy enough to play. He didn't have to sit out. So it was what it was. He did not have a good first half of the season.
Right.
So what I would tell people is, if Najee Harris gets off to another slow start, you're not going to see a 70-30 split in carries. You're going to see Jaylen Warren in there more with the ones, and it might be more of a 50-50, carry situation with your 2 running backs. So, again, people who are freaking out that you should bench Najee Harris. You shouldn't bench Najee Harris. But if he struggles early in the season again, there's no excuse now. You do have Jaylen Warren there. He's a proven commodity, and not just because of a 62-yard run. You know what that guy can do from last year too. So now they have that in their back pocket, and I don't think they'll be afraid to go and use it either.
This is where I see it. I think that Jaylen Warren has put himself in a position that he is a viable number 2 option for if like you said, if Najee Harris is the pace of Najee Harris isn't working in a game, you can switch it up. But like you said, with the small sample size we've seen of Jaylen Warren, there's a lot of people that point to his yards per carry and things like that. A lot of his yards per carry last year were boosted by third and long draws where the Steelers were just like, hey, we're just not going to turn the ball over here. We're just going to hand it off, see what yards we can get and punt the ball away. And the defense wasn't looking for him, and he'd be able to get good yards. And that's not to say that Jaylen Warren's success in his rookie season wasn't solid and warranted, because he did make some good hard runs. But it's also different when you are the bell cow, when you are the guy who is getting it and the defense knows you're getting it and they're coming for you every single time. When you're the guy that's coming off the bench and the defense isn't looking for you, that's when they're like, okay, let's go look at George Pickens, let's go look at Deontay Johnson and Pat Freiermuth. It becomes easier to make some of those plays, and I think that's something that Jaylen Warren benefits from. However, like you said, if he's making plays in those situations, you want to find ways to get in the ball. And I do think there will be a healthy split between these two running backs, but still the lion's share of those splits should still go to Najee Harris in this situation until he proves otherwise. And we even talked to him after the game, and Najee Harris was like, he was asked about only getting 2 carries, and he said, hey, Coach Tomlin has a plan. I'm going to stick with Mike T. And basically indicating like, hey, this has been part of the plan. And personally, Ray, and you and I think I've talked about this in training camp. We haven't seen Najee Harris take a practice over the way he had the last 2 years when he had practiced. And I think that's been by design, because the Steelers are like, hey, you don't need to see you practice hard anymore. We know what you got there. Just be ready and healthy for the start of the season, because he wasn't last year, and it clearly impacted his play.
I mean, honestly, Chris, if we do go to more of a 60-40 split or a 50-50 split at some point this season, I think Steelers fans have to recognize that the Steelers are merely catching up to what the rest of the NFL is doing. I mean, the days of the bell cow running back, taking 90% of the snaps, it's over in a lot of NFL cities. And I think if you look at what happened in Dallas with Tony Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott, even if Ezekiel Elliott didn't fall off a cliff and, not earn that contract, Tony Pollard was a good enough running back. It's been proven that he deserved a lot of carries in that offense too. And you can go from offense to offense in the NFL, and it's the same situation everywhere. So it might just be that the Steelers are finally going to maybe get on track and do what the rest of the NFL is doing. And they've done it before. It might have been 30 years ago before Tomlin got here, but I think I've mentioned this before on the podcast. Eric Pegram and Bam Morris, way back in the day when they went to the Super Bowl in 1995, that was a pretty good thunder and lightning tandem there, right? Your big burly back who was really good short yardage, early down running back, and then Eric Pegram, kind of your scat back guy, can get to the edge, turn on the jets, and maybe add a different dimension to your offense. So I don't know. People are looking at this as a slight to Najee Harris. I just look at it as, you got a great 1-2 punch. Why don't you just go out there and use it?
I agree. And another thing I wanted to point out, and I pointed this out on Channel 11 WPXI's The Final Word show Sunday night when we talked about it there too, but Mike Tomlin has done this before. Like if you go back to his very first year, where like the whole narrative about when he said, I'm going to run Willie Parker till the wheels fall off, that started from his first season when he was coaching in the NFL, and Willie Parker was a major asset to the Steelers offense in 2007. And he carried the ball out of between the top 2 running backs for the Steelers. If you just looked at their carries alone, between him and Najee Davenport that year, Willie Parker carried the ball 75% of the time. It wasn't close. He was the guy. The next year, they got Mueldy Moore, who they trusted a lot more to have the ball. And the next year, Willie Parker's share between the top 2 running backs dropped to 60%. And it was closer to that even share. And I think that's what you're probably going to see this year with Najee Harris. Last year, Jaylen Warren got some touches in there, but he was still an undrafted rookie who was adapting to the NFL. And as much as we're talking about like Broderick Jones, we're going to talk about Joey Porter Jr. in the next segment, and guys like that, Jaylen Warren needed time to adapt as well. And he did a lot of things well for a rookie, but Najee Harris was still the much more polished player. Now, Jaylen Warren has some polish on him. Now he's able to adapt to some of the minute parts of the running back job in the NFL. And so now you can give Najee Harris more of a breather. And I think, one, it will help the Steelers with the diversity that they can bring out at the running back position this year. But two, I think it could help lengthen Najee Harris's career, as the Steelers probably want him for some time with the skills that he brings to the table, because they won't be running him to the wheels fall off. They won't be putting him in a rough situation. He'll be able to come out, maybe have anywhere between like 200 to 250 carries, and Jaylen Warren has maybe like 100 or so, and they have that kind of a split. And I think that is a much more healthy place for Najee Harris to still be an impact player for the Steelers, but also still have the longevity of a career that he'd probably want in the NFL.
Listen, Chris, there's a lot to like about Najee Harris. He's durable. He's a good leader. I think, the mentality that Omar Khan and Andy Weidel have about imposing your will on teams. We haven't seen that in the preseason because there's no need to do that. But you're in tough football games. In the second half, you want to close out a game. I think he's a perfect kind of back who could do that, potentially move the chains. I think what Steelers fans have to get over, and it's not going to change because he's not this kind of back, but he's not going to have Willie Parker or Jaylen Warren type explosiveness / big playability. He's not the type of guy who's going to have a lot of plus 20-yard runs. That's just not who he is. So maybe it's just expectations with the fan base, but I think the Steelers know what they have in Najee Harris, and quite honestly, I don't think he's going to be appreciated if things go well. If this line continues to progress, if Najee continues to progress, this is all going to come to the forefront in the regular season. This is definitely one area where you can't judge a lot what's happened in the preseason.
I agree entirely. I want to talk about other players here. We've talked a lot about the offense. Let's talk about some of the defense on the other side of this. We do have some other offensive players I want to mention, but we'll do all that right here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Another reminder that this show is sponsored by Mike's Beer Bar. And again, I can't recommend enough the beer options they have, from 500 different available beers, 300 local beers, 80 of those local beers being on tap for you. But also, they have great food options. You go in, they have so many different great sandwiches you can try, but the ultimate piece de resistance is the steak on a stone option, the only place in Pittsburgh that offers it between Mike's Beer Bar and their neighbor, the North Shore Tavern. You go there, and when you order a steak on a stone, you can order several different cuts, several different styles of steak, but it all comes out on a heated stone right in front of you, where every time you cut off a piece, you just press it into the stone and you can get it, whether you like it rare, medium well, well done, however you like your steak cooked. You can choose that for each slice of meat with steak on a stone, and then you get amazing fries, great salad options on the side, and of course all those beers that I mentioned that you can try from all the different flavors, whether you like IPAs, you like lagers, you like Kolsch beers, you like wheat beers, you like dark beers, whatever kind of beer you want, sour beers, Mike's Beer Bar has it. So go to Mike's Beer Bar on the North Shore of Pittsburgh, right across the street from PNC Park. You can not only get your food fix, you can get a beer fix and your sports fix with over 20 televisions they have there for the best bar experience in Pittsburgh. Go to Mike's Beer Bar today and tell them that Chris sent you. We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, I want to talk to you about a few different guys, but let's talk about Joey Porter Jr. right here, because he got an interception, and it wasn't like in a spectacular interception where it was one-handed and he was against like Jamar Chase, and it was an interception, which was something that it was said he couldn't do because he only had one interception in college. And he said, after the combine, when the Steelers drafted him at OTAs and at training camp, I can catch the ball. He even said it as recent as this week, and he showed it in that moment. And it wasn't just that he made the catch. On that play, he did all the fundamentals right to put himself in position to intercept the football. He had underneath zone coverage. He had to wall his receiver off to the sideline. He did that. He controlled his spot. And when Barkley, the quarterback for the Bills, tried to throw it in his direction, he was sitting there waiting for it, like, okay, yeah, you put it to this spot and it's going to be a problem. And it was. He intercepts it. And you see, you were at the game too. You saw how the Steelers bench and the Steelers defense erupted for him, and how excited they were to see him make this have this moment here in the stadium where his dad played, for so many years. I thought that was a really cool moment, but I also thought it was really cool how it happened, and I think it's a good sign of where Joey Porter is. The question, though, Ray, is where does he fall in the priority of this defense? Because Patrick Peterson and Levi Wallace also look pretty good, and it's going to be tough to just say, oh yeah, let's move one of those guys out to put in a rookie.
Yeah, so I think you saw Joey Porter play a lot. Mike Tomlin wanted that to happen, and he made that happen. What you want to do if you're this coaching staff is you want to figure out what your best options are right now. And it might not necessarily be for the 49ers game, but going forward, when is going to be the right time to have Joey Porter on the outside and maybe put Patrick Peterson on the inside in the slot, which we've heard a lot about really since going back to the spring, but we haven't really seen it in practices, and we definitely haven't seen it in games. So I don't know, Chris. Maybe they're waiting to unveil that, before the season starts. They're only going to practice twice this week. I doubt on a short week they're going to mess much with that, just on a Monday, Tuesday practice schedule. So they do have the benefit of having 17 days between the final preseason game and the regular season if they want to look at Peterson in the slot and Porter on the outside. But, I don't think they want to do that after one preseason game. Porter's been good in practice. I think they want to give him more exposure. They want to see what it's all about. So I guess, the positive, he got healthy. He was able to play in this game, but I do think there's, they want some more eyes on him. They want some more evaluation to take place before they go ahead and commit to playing him a lot on the outside.
Agreed. And it's okay to like what you see from Joey Porter Jr., but like you said, they want to make sure that he is brought up the right way and not rushed into a situation, much like with Broderick Jones. But what guy, there's no reason to rush him because the Steelers have probably the two best edge rushers in football right now as a combination. But Nick Herbig, this guy, what is this guy made of right now, Ray? Because he's just getting sacks every week. In practice, he's dominated. And then I was like, okay, let's see him do it in a preseason game. Okay, let's see him do it in 2 preseason games. And it feels like I keep drawing new lines for where Nick Herbig has to impress me before I say, man, what should the Steelers do with Nick Herbig? Because TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith maybe are the best 1-2 edge rushing punch in football, in my opinion. But with Nick Herbig there, what do you even do? Because you signed Marcus Golden. What is it about Nick that's making him so special in his early part of his rookie year? And what do you see his involvement being in on the Steelers defense?
Well, I've sort of changed my mind on that. I thought after they go out and got Marcus Golden, I thought, okay, Nick Herbig is going to play a lot of special teams. He'll be the number 4. I don't know how many snaps he'll get a game, but it won't be significant. That's out the window now. This guy can rush the passer. If people watch the highlights, not only is he a great student of the game, Chris, you're out there as much as I am in training camp. He's working with TJ Watt after practice every single day, trying to perfect his craft. So student of the game, hard worker. I think the underrated aspect of his game is the athleticism. And if you watch that sack, the strip sack, the way he bends underneath the offensive tackle, braces his arm against the ground to stay on his feet, and then have the presence of mind to find the quarterback with his eyes and to get the ball out. That's the stuff of a veteran, and it's being noticed. There's national analysts out there tweeting out his tape, making a big deal about where he is right now. So, I sort of understand why he fell to the 4th round. 6'1", 240. I guess there's that question of whether he could hold up against NFL tackles, but through 2 games, I don't think there's much doubt. If he continues to do what he's doing athletically, changing up his pass rush plan, this is a guy who can make it work in the NFL too. I think he's going to be a hidden gem in this draft for the Steelers, in my opinion.
I think he is going to be a hidden gem. He certainly showed it. And one of those analysts talking about Brian Baldinger, I think did a really good clip up of a move that TJ Watt did just last year and showed how in the Bills game, Nick Herbig did the exact same move and made it work for both for sacks on the play. Like it's crazy. And Nick Herbig and TJ Watt have both talked about how Nick Herbig has been working to learn from TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith to add their moves to his game. But now TJ Watt and Nick Herbig both confirmed to us that TJ Watt has learned to move from Nick Herbig. And I'm like, what is happening here? Like, do the Steelers, is edge rushing the new wide receiver, draft position for the Steelers? Because it seems like they just keep producing guys that can kill at that position. And it's been a big boost. So lots to say there. I wanted to ask you about other guys in this roster, Ray. You wrote about Calvin Austin in your Who's Rising and Falling after the Steelers' second preseason game article as far as a player who's rising. Can you explain to us what you've seen from him that may give him more of a share of the Steelers' targets this season than we thought coming into the year?
Big play capability. Against the Buccaneers, he got behind the defense for a 67-yard touchdown. I get it. It wasn't against starters, but he proved he can get behind NFL defensive backs and provide big plays. And if you look at the punt return, quality special teams plays, splash plays for the Steelers on special teams, it's been few and far between the last couple of years. Gunnar Olszewski was okay last year. kind of fell out of favor after that fumble against the Patriots. They've just been searching for somebody at that position and, guys to flip the field. So if he could do that in special teams, and if he can be, he's not going to run down the field and hit home runs every single play, but if he's that deep play threat for you once in a while, not only can he draw coverage and open things up for other people, but he can occasionally hit the big play. And then, of course, he could also be that short yardage, traditional slot when they need it too. Listen, I'm not saying he's your number 3. He's not. Allen Robinson has had a really good camp. He's entrenched as the number 3, but when you're talking about that number 4, that guy who can maybe play 15, 20 snaps, get you 2 or 3 catches, maybe break a big play in the return game. Honestly, I think that's all you're looking for out of your number 4, and I think Austin has nailed down that job pretty thoroughly here with his performance in training camp and most notably the preseason games.
My last thing I want to ask you about here, Ray, is the backup center spot, because Kendrick Green had a rough first preseason game and he had a rough second preseason game. 2 bad snaps, holding, Mike Tomlin calling it unacceptable when asked about it. How much longer is Kendrick Green going to be a Steeler? Because at this rate, he didn't even dress for a single game last year. We all saw his rookie season. We've seen his training camp and his preseason performances here. Is he long for the Steelers roster? Or do they find a way to hold on to him? And what do you do at backup center? Is it Nate Herbig? Is it McCollum? Is it Spencer Anderson? Or should they go get somebody? Because if Mason Cold goes down, that's a huge hole in this roster right now.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know the severity of Nate Herbig's shoulder injury. Listen, if he's healthy, he is your backup center. Nate Herbig is your backup center. What they were doing with Green in training camp, that was just to see if there was a reason to keep him for a 3rd season after drafting him in the 3rd round. That's all that was about. They went out and got Nick Herbig to be your backup center and your backup guard, and that's what he's going to be as long as he's healthy. The issue is if Nate Herbig isn't healthy, what do you do then? McCollum is probably a practice squad player who you could elevate in an emergency, but the wild card is Spencer Anderson. They've just started within the last week to take a look at him at center, and I didn't go back and watch the tape yet, but from what I remember, he did okay when he was in there against the Bills on Saturday night when he was playing center. So he's kind of like your new Chris Hubbard. He could play guard, tackle, and center. I think he's really valuable. I think he's got a chance to stick on the 53-man roster. But to your bigger point, Kendrick Green probably isn't going to be your backup center. I think in the end they have to hope Nate Herbig is healthy for the opener and stays healthy throughout the season.
I agree. It's going to be something to watch to see how that plays out and see how healthy Herbig, the other Herbig, the older Herbig, actually is this year. We'll talk about how that progress goes here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thanks, Ray, so much for joining us. Thank you all for joining us here on the North Shore Drive podcast. From the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, I'm your host, Chris Carter. Check out all of our work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette at post-gazette.com, where you can get all of our written work. You can also find all of our podcasts and all of our video content right here on YouTube or on your favorite podcasting app, however you listen to it. We still, even though training camp's over, we'll still be having all of our content coming to you. Steelers practice resumes Monday today, and we have 2 practices that we'll be at where you can check out our reporting from. And then the Steelers have their final preseason game Thursday night, where we get a final look at the guys in the roster before August 29th comes, and the Steelers have to make their final cuts along with the NFL. Stay tuned with the North Shore Drive podcast to get all your updates, as well as the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We'll see you Wednesday for another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast, brought to you by Mike's Beer Bar. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For 3 months of digital access to post-gazette.com at 99 cents, click the link below in the description.